Thank you so much for being here, Benita. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're at and what's going on in your world before we dive in?
Oh, wow. Amazing. So I have a business called Create Radical Love, which
Hmm.
is a coaching and consulting business focused on people designing and creating their wholly loved, like radically loved life. And
Mm,
so that applies to people both in business and individuals.
right.
And we live in Richmond, Virginia right now. And we moved here a couple of years ago from New York City. And this is always a really interesting time of year because we transitioned to remote schooling for my son, who's 10 years
Mm,
old, when
mm,
we moved here. So this is our third year of doing virtual schooling.
cool.
So that's very much just on the top of my sort of mind and heart at the moment because we've just been back in it the last few weeks.
Right.
So that's happening. And yeah, I'm just working with a ton of people. I work with a university here in Richmond called BCU, and
Cool.
their master's program in advertising and communications called the Brand Center.
Right.
So I'm doing a lot of workshops and coaching of the students there. And I'm also in the process of co-founding a second company based on connecting people. And
Oh
that,
my
and we
goodness.
can get into this, but that is all done in 2 or 3 days a week. And the other 2 or 3 days are focused on my son and being his learning coach and leading his schooling. So it's this whole,
Oh my gosh, I have goosebumps everywhere. Did you just say a learning coach? That is so
yeah, that's what they
cool.
call the role in his virtual school. If you're like the
Oh,
adult leading the child's schooling, they give you the title of learning coach.
wow.
Yeah,
Incredible timing as to where our world is right now in the
that's
world
right.
of school.
That's right.
Learning coach. Okay, we'll probably come back to that. However,
Okay.
I love everything that you just shared. And it really leads me into, I ask all of the moms on the show to share, how does redefining motherhood show up in your life and what does that journey look like for you?
Amazing. It's so beautiful to have it framed from that perspective. Because I am a life coach, and I use that term
Mhm.
because it's a
People
term
don't
that's
get it.
understood.
Yeah.
It's like understood that I look at everything in the life, not just executive coach or not just relationship
Yes.
coach or not just health coach or whatever the specifics might be. It's sort of how is this all interlinked and tied together? And the
Hmm.
motherhood piece, the parent piece, our relationship to other people in our life is a huge component of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I worked in the advertising industry for 17 years. I worked my way up. I was at a pinnacle role at a pinnacle advertising agency, guiding a fantastic creative department from like a talent development and recruiting standpoint. And and so it was like on paper everything was amazing, and yet there were aspects of it that were not aligning for me and were not
Hmm.
fulfilling. And it was
Hmm.
very, it was a catalytic moment. It was like,
Hmm.
oh, change is being asked of me because this
Hmm.
isn't feeling aligned. And isn't that interesting? Because on paper, the mind wants to say, no, this is everything you've wanted.
Yeah.
And so it was a really powerful moment. And
Mm.
I'm now sober 13 years, but at that point I had been sober for 10 years. And so I'd been on a really deep, intentional, mindful, spiritual journey through that
Mm.
process.
Mhm.
And so at 10 years sober and my professional life not quite aligning and being fulfilling,
Whew.
there's a lot there to like create that contrast and see like,
Yeah.
I'm going to trust that this is not aligned and not
Wow.
listen to the rational mind. And
Mm.
part of this was spending time with my son.
Mm.
At that point, he was 7, and I had gone back to work just at like, he was like 11 months, almost a year. And so that was beautiful. I did get a fair amount of time with him that I chose to take out of the 2008-9 recession.
Right.
The universe helped me take some time after a
Wow.
layoff. So I did have that first year with him, but then I was like, I
Right.
love my career and I'm back to work, and I work in an industry that is very demanding and competitive and oftentimes long hours. And I put a lot of that on myself too.
Mhm.
And so I had not found a natural flow. I would work these 12+ hour days and come home and maybe eke in bedtime, and then
Right.
like take him to school in the morning, but then not see him the rest of the day. And there was
Right.
certainly always something about that felt out of alignment,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
As much as we can rationalize all of the reasons why, of course, we
Mhm.
need to go be productive and circulate wealth and income into our homes and things, it just never made sense. And so given the opportunity to resign, I chose that. Like, I was like, I'm
Right.
going to resign. Like,
Right.
this isn't aligned. I'm going to resign and and at that point we had 3 months of savings, which for some people is a lot and other people is nothing.
Right.
In New York City, a very expensive place to live.
Yes.
My husband has his own business.
Okay.
And yet, as a family, we decided, like, yeah, let's do this. My
Wow.
husband was like, yeah, I know when you've taken these leaps before, you end up happier. And like,
Hmm.
and then we're all, everybody's happier when one of us is feeling more aligned.
Yeah.
So, and he's amazing and very supportive. And so I'm grateful for that aspect of this as well. It's been a
Absolutely.
family unit
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
And, I resigned and I worked out my notice period, which was great because there was like a transition period. But I remember, like, it was one of the days where I was walking my son home from school. Like, I was now able to pick him up
Right.
2 or 3 afternoons. I would switch off with my husband and we'd spend time in Manhattan, in the city, at our favorite places, and then take the train home or, to
Mm-hmm.
whatever his after school activity was that day. And he was holding my hand and he said, Mom, I'm so glad you quit that job.
Ooh.
And you're like, okay, there's confirmation right there. Like, he's
Yeah.
definitely engaged. He's following along. He's
Yep.
aware, of course, of
Yeah.
course, but to have
Totally.
those exact words, come out of his mouth, I was like,
Ooh.
okay, this
Ooh.
is the right thing.
Right.
And yeah, I just started like integrating my life. So, okay, I'm
Hmm.
spending time with him. I'm spending time with my husband. I'm going into the city, meeting people, working, talking about what I felt was missing in the industry, in
Right.
terms of the advertising industry, which was the sense of love and unconditional love for ourselves and then for one another and then for
Right.
the work that we're creating, the systems and structures and processes in the businesses. And more people were like, if you did something around that, I would work with you, I'd be
Wow.
a client. So out of a deep meditation in my first full free month of like meditation, yoga, time with family, create radical love as a business emerged. And then I
Wow.
could see like, oh, I can do this 2 or 3 days a week. I can
Wow.
spend the other 2 or 3 days with my son and doing whatever, is more needed in his life and in his activities and things. And then like, let's see what happens. And from there we came to see, oh, I'm now like more of a digital nomad. I'm location independent. Most of my clients I was working with over video, 3
Right.
years ago,
Right.
and we could live anywhere. So that's
Wow.
where the move to Richmond came in. About
Right.
6 months later, we started to see we could do that and create
Mm-hmm.
like a much more expansive experience in terms of just our space, reducing expenses, creating more freedom, different experiences for our son in multiple ways. And one of those was the availability of virtual public school here in
Wow.
Virginia. And so we
Right.
enrolled him in that school. And now that, is a huge piece of how our current system is devised in terms of our design for living, which is I spend 2 or 3 days on my business a week. My husband spends 2 or 3 days on his. He's a fitness consultant and also has his own business. And
Mm.
then we switch the other days of the week focused on leading our son's learning.
Whew. I'm like, have all the feels right now. Like, have tears in my eyes. And yeah.
It's fun.
Whew.
And our son has been an incredible teacher in terms of how he really does need us and expect us to operate from a child-led perspective.
Ooh.
Very much who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He needs that approach. And like, that was new I was like, oh, like at 2 or 3, we were really starting to see who he was in that regard. And it was like, oh, this isn't going to be about me imposing my desire,
No.
hope, will, like structure, like, hey, do this just because I think it would be great. It was like, no.
No.
He's very clear about his excitements. He's very clear about what works for him and what doesn't. And so
Mm.
schooling from home has been an expression of that and like us
Mm.
following his lead for sure.
Right. Okay. So the first question is totally selfish. It's for me. Is so homeschool, not so virtual home. No, what do you call it? Virtual school?
So virtual school or school from home.
School from home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about the social dynamics and connections? Like,
Sure.
how does that part play in?
Yeah, it's always a question that comes up, right? And we're so conditioned to believe, and I had heard this on multiple podcasts when I was researching whether we were going to do homeschooling, which is where you create your whole own curriculum based on different,
Okay.
um, existing curriculums out there that you
Right.
like put together that feel right for your family. So that's homeschool, or homeschooling is when like you are the one administrating that
Right.
whole process.
Right.
School at home or school from home
Okay.
is the variation of that, where you are plugged into an existing, oftentimes virtual or remote school that exists.
Mm.
So we have
Mhm.
teachers, we have a principal, we have administration and staff. And
Cool.
so that's the nuance difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the socialization piece is so interesting. So yeah, I was doing all this research, and every podcast I would listen to where people would talk about whether they're homeschooling or unschooling or world schooling or
Or
natural
unschooling.
schooling.
Love that.
Yeah, unschooling is a really fascinating approach as well, where it's 100% child led. Like, what is your
Right.
child interested in? And then if it's like farming or cooking or engineering or like building trucks and toys or whatever, you just wrap the learning into
Mm.
those particular activities that your child's already gravitating towards.
Seems very, very cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when I was listening to all of those, they would always say, yeah, like people ask about socialization, or like there's this idea that we learn how to be good citizens or interact socially with others, like in the best possible way through brick and mortar school.
Right.
And that didn't make sense to me. I was
It
like,
doesn't. It doesn't
there
make
are not
sense.
a lot of, there's some really not good things about the socialization dynamics, cliques, bullying, just people feeling sort of comparing and despairing, right, at very vulnerable
Disconnected.
ages about like others and what others have, right? And you see just all of the differences of those around you
Mm.
as you're developing, and like your brain and your sense of self. And so we very quickly found, as we were doing school from home, we were connecting with teachers weekly, and my son loves working one-on-one with adults. So that really has always been a very powerful form of socialization for him.
Mm.
That socialization. Every time
Mm.
your child is interacting with you and having a meaningful, any
I
conversation,
I was just gonna
they're being
say,
socialized.
yeah, like I think about the times that we go to the park, and it's like this fine line of like, well, my daughter's 2,
Yeah.
of the fine line of like independent play, and also like how's she going to learn how to play? Well, she's going to learn that from me and
Right.
dad,
Modeling,
right. So then
redirecting. Yeah.
right. So then I'm like, okay, there's this like pull of like wanting her to be independent and safe, and also how else is she going to learn how to interact in that playground? Like I just thinking one example, climbing up the stairs and then going down the slide. Well, you kind of stand back. I'm an observer, and I love child psychology. I love all things children, in terms of just like how the brain works and it develops. And so I stand back and I look and I go, yes, there's excitement, and yes, there's like this play, right? And so the kids are just like all running up the stairs and just going, and they're playing tag, and I get it, and I'm all in for it. And then there's this like, oh, but there's more people around than just me. And I watch our daughter and I go, how does she know how to stand back? How does she know how to be safe on the steps, right? It's modeling those pieces from other kids. But if other kids aren't doing that, then I don't want her to learn that from them. And so, after what has it been, 3 or 2 months of back reintegration of the parks, I've been really mindful of like showing her and modeling to her, like, you get to go up the stairs. And if you're not liking the pace of someone behind you, you can move over to the side. And it's like, it's not like I talk about this stuff to her, but I got to watch her model it. And I was like, if I don't encourage her or model how to engage on a playground, how will she learn? And I'm not saying that there's a right or a proper way. I'm just saying like teaching what feels good for her. Like all the kids racing up and then going down the slide, Hannah stands back.
Yep.
It's like, I'm not going to force her to get in there because she's just in tune with what feels good for her. She wants to wait for everyone to go down. And I just thought, wow, how cool is that? And so that's the connection that was just made listening to you share that.
Yep.
It is like, if they don't know how to engage if we don't share that with them.
And I love the piece about really honoring her own pace, right? So she's needing to pause, especially maybe being a smaller one of the children on that playground in that, rush of kids. Oh, instinctually, I'm going to step back and pause and wait.
Totally.
And there's such conditioning around like getting our kids into the mix and getting them into the flow and not falling behind and being a part of, and whatever all of these again
those are
comparisons are.
Yeah, those are the thoughts that come up for me when I think about, like, I've always, since she was since she was in my belly, I was like, you're going to go to a forest school. I just feel this energy. And then she was born and I learned about her more. And I was like, oh yeah, like you're going to go to a school that's like outdoors. And then I was like, now this is, the world that we're in. And I'm going, oh my gosh, like, oh my gosh. But those thoughts in my head come up as she's going to fall behind or she's not going to be like everyone
Right.
else. Right.
So that can pop in, right? Like, am I doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? Is this going to be like such a difference that it's somehow going to like hold her, my son back?
Mm-hmm.
And every time those thoughts come up for me, I return back to, wait a minute, who is he and what feels really true to him?
Mm.
And if we are allowing and creating space for him to say what he needs to learn, to be able to like cultivate that skill and ability, which is
Mm-hmm.
also massively part of socialization and like social communication and those dynamics, advocating for oneself. Well, if you end up in a unique situation and scenario,
Mm.
you generally, at least in my son's case, he has learned then these incredible skills and abilities to advocate for himself. Like,
Ooh.
he met the principal at an event in person, which only happened a few times a year kind of thing. And he had met her one time before, the year before, and he came home and he's like, I would love to like actually just do a video chat with her. I'd love to just like connect with her one-on-one. Oh, okay, let's send her an email and see what she says. And we did, and she was so delighted. And she was
Cool.
like, no one else has ever asked me no other student has ever asked me to do just a one-on-one video chat. This is so
Cool.
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 So he already has that, like, he seeks out the
Mm.
socialization that feels right to him because we've allowed him the space to do that, and we're not pushing the mind fears going, oh, other people have defined socialization in this way.
Right.
Now, we do have him engaged in activities
Right.
outside of, the day of school when we're at home. So he has multiple friends. So I
Mm-hmm.
make play dates. Like, I'd say he
Right.
sees 1 to 2 friends. We've obviously limited that during this time,
Mm-hmm.
but right now it's 2 that we're like kind of in a
A bubble with.
social distancing pod with. We know what
Yeah.
they do, they know what we do, and we all are like respectful of each other in that way. And then he is doing an online acting class.
Cool.
He loves acting and characters and character development and storytelling. And these are all examples of like, over time, seeing how he's developing and what he's most interested in, and then signing him up for those activities that are, inclusive of other kids, that are like, group activities. So he does acting 1 day a week, and then he does coding. He loves
Mm.
anything to do with video games. And so he was very interested in when they were created, who created them, where were they created, oh, look at this initial character came in at this time, and oh no, then they edited it and it was developed this way and they made this change and there's this mod and this. And so I was like, oh, you're interested in the creation of them
Right.
more than just playing them. And
Right.
so we followed that lead, and so then he
Cool.
started going to coding school. And so that's another place where he engages with other kids and also young adults who are the instructors there. And that's a great, again, he loves one-on-one with any, adults are like a little more grounded for
Yeah.
him. And so
Yeah.
he's like in this direct conversation
Mm.
rather than kind of having to navigate some of the uncertainty around other young people. So it's a balance for us
Yeah.
between
I
having
love it.
him experiencing all of those various forms of socialization.
Yes. And I love it. And I was like, I feel like I totally attracted you into my life for many reasons. We actually connected, right? I feel like almost in April or May, like at the beginning of
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I can just see the alignment, which I love. And the word that comes up for me when I hear you talk is freedom. And you talked about
Yes.
expansiveness and freedom. And it's like really, high chunk, like deconditioning and getting rid of the programs that say we've got to live life this way, and then feeling so trapped and stuck in a life that was designed on someone else's way of living. And
That's right.
right. So having all of these conversations with so many moms around like the things that just weren't working. And I think, this is exactly why this podcast is so important, is because there are so many of us out there doing it. And so I feel like, just like for kids, that modeling is so important, because there is this element of like trusting and knowing that intuition is there, and trusting and believing it before we see it. And also it's nice to see the evidence too, right? It's like,
of course,
you need the harmony of both.
yeah.
And that's what I want to, or I should say, that's the kind of conversations we are facilitating in this platform is, how are we doing it? How are we designing life so that we can be the mom we want to be and that we desire to be, and that we can have financial success and we can have a healthy relationship with our partner?
Yep.
It's this element of like having it all without the hustle and the grind.
That's right.
Right. That I
That's
think,
right.
like, I'll say my mother's generation and probably her mother's generation were conditioned or kind of grew up in that belief. You know what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely. I think as women's rights, equality in terms of gender equality, when that stuff was really at the forefront, and I would say through like the 60s, 70s, and then, you know, my parents were parenting me more in like the mid 70s to like mid 90s kind of, whereas more directly, you know, in the home and things like that. It was so like, yeah, you can have it all. And then there was no discussion about like the costs of like what that would mean in relation to, I would say, the more patriarchal or male version of that. So it was like modeled, especially the business piece and the going into being in the working world piece was modeled on what men had done. And it was like, okay, women, you of course can do this too.
Totally.
Great. I believe that that was the message I was given from the time I was born little. Okay, great. But then there was no discussion about like, but there's different relationships to beings in the world, and a mother's relationship to the child is just biologically and in other ways different to the father's relationship or the male partner's relationship, right? And it's like, though those nuances have been taking time to like shake themselves through the collective consciousness. And so I talk a lot about, and my clients' relationship comes up a lot with my clients, and it's been coming up a lot lately, I think, especially as we're all very
in
close
relationship
with those we're in relationship with right now. So it's like potent. It's like a real potent time of looking at that. And I think equity in relationship to relationships is a very confusing concept.
It is like mind-blowing. It is this equality versus equity and how that pertains to being a parent. It is, and in relationship, it has definitely been a topic of conversation for us, for sure.
Right. And so how I look at it and how I have others look at it, and it's very much evolved over the many years of my relationship with my husband. We've been together for a very long time. We met in our 20s and dated for a long time, and we're together 10 years before we got married. And so we've been together for 24 years in total, 14 of them married, and now 10 with a child. It's evolved over time in terms of my own love and acceptance of myself. My own love and acceptance of my own strengths, my role in the relationship, what I prefer and desire and am excited to do versus what I'm not. And then having those discussions with my partner and to see his strengths and it's to me it becomes about a totality of value. There's not like, hey, you're going to do the dishes 3.5 days a week, and I'm going to do the dishes 3.5 days a week, and it's all going to be equal. Like
that's exhausting.
Doing anything related to that, whether it's related to finances, sex, all of the like key hot button like topics in relationship that you're constantly renegotiating. If you're trying to find a place of like equality or like that kind of even equity, like tit for tat, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Each are different in so many beautiful ways. So we've really found this like shared value approach where it's like, I see my highest excitements, my strengths, my value, and that's the role or the multiple roles I play. And I see yours, and they're different. And like the yin and the yang, like then they balance each other out.
I have goosebumps everywhere. And again, I just love life so much right now. These are the conversations we are having a lot. I'm having these conversations with clients. We are diving into this with my mastermind, with my friends. And it is this question of like resentment. It's like equality, it breeds resentment.
Yes.
right? And it's
Well,
like,
that's an expectation that's impossible. And so then from
yes,
there, the mind is hanging on to expectation. And whenever we're in that place of expectation, we're immediately setting ourselves up for resentment, because
totally.
rarely can anyone, including ourselves, live up to the expectation in the mind.
Yeah. And I think one of my like my least favorite expressions in relationship of any kind is your expectations are so high. Like I'll never get to your expectations. And it's like if someone is expressing that to me, then I am living, like I am projecting that out. And it has nothing to do with that person. It has everything to
No,
do with me. That is my responsibility. Like, what belief, which
that's right.
program have I bought into that is creating this level of resentment and expectation? And that is my job to do that deep work around that, because the whole intention is to evolve. Like, like making space for that to happen
Yeah.
takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of resiliency. And again, this is why I think, us as life coaches, high chunk, right?
Yep.
It's that it's guiding through that because it logically doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's not, again, like all of the messaging and the conditioning and the mind's desire, I think, to keep us safe, and
Of
it's
course. Yeah.
the functioning of the brain in terms
Mm,
of the rational thought piece. It's a bit more linear,
right.
and so it's trying to connect dots to feel safe and secure, and oftentimes those are incredibly limiting.
Yeah.
Like it works when it's like getting you from point A to B, or
Yeah.
it works when it's remembering a key safety,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
experience, like don't
Mm-hmm.
touch a hot stove, right? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right. Point A to point B, right? Keeping
Yeah.
me safe. But when it's related to very nuanced aspects of living, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
relationship or whether it's like sense of self and identity in relation to how I show up in the world in all of the various ways, then the rational point A to point B part of the mind is really can keep us very limited, like with
Totally limited.
patterned blinders on, and a lot of belief of like what I should or shouldn't do.
Right. Like
And
what is okay,
anything
what's not okay, right?
anything with a should in either direction attached to it is what I would say at this point now in my years of doing this, probably 100% associated with a projected or conditioned belief that's like
Yeah.
come from somebody else and
It's
their
the
experience.
generation, the generational the generational guilt, the generational experience of yeah, just this like we were born to evolve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like just that very thought, that truth that we were born to evolve is enough to question what's not working.
Right?
That's all we need.
When you mentioned that earlier about like when we're considering this for our children, right? And really, let's say, following their lead, but all of a sudden our mind is like, am I being
Mm,
too lenient, or am I not giving enough, I don't know, structure, or whatever the mind
yes.
says? A wonderful question to ask is, who's saying that?
Right. Yep.
Where's that like critique or
Mm-hmm.
questioning coming from?
Mm-hmm.
For the critical self, like, oh no, that's coming from somebody else. Oh,
Yeah.
and sometimes you can identify directly like whose voice that is, and other times it might be like, oh no, that's just like what I've heard out
Yep.
in the collective, not for me.
Right.
I'm going to move forward with what feels aligned. And this is the other thing in terms of that as well. In moments with children, I have really found with my son, when we've come up against one of those moments where like I really feel strongly about a way I think we should proceed with something, and it feels different to his, and we're like rubbing up against each other, and you feel that tension or that
Mm.
contraction, then that like, what am I expecting comes in, and I'm like, I think I have a particular perspective or like expectation about
Hmm.
this situation. And again, where's that coming from?
Right.
Okay, some outside source, not him.
Right.
What if I just released it?
Yeah.
And like, let's see what happens. And every single time, we relax, the
Yes.
tension immediately goes away. Like it's
Totally.
hysterical. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that was easier.
Yeah.
And then reaching whatever the milestone is. Like
Mm,
potty training was one of those where I was
mm,
very like, are we doing the right thing? Is it happening at the right time? All of that questioning. The minute we just let go of any expectation, within, I don't know how many months, then he was interested on his own, doing it on his own. And it totally
yes.
happened without like any
Yes.
forcing or any of that stuff. So constantly, to your point about confirmation, like the human needs confirmation. We need
Yes.
to see back energetically in terms of like actual circumstantial results in the illusion that we can see, like, oh, this is
Mhm.
better, this worked out, this is feeling good, oh, this thing
Right.
happened.
Right.
But I have found all of those milestones have happened with my son when I have let go,
Right. And you
rather
show
than like
up
gripping or forcing a
forcing.
particular approach.
Yeah. It's like letting go of that expectation and letting go of the pressure to perform, like for who says, like
Right?
we have our daughter, okay, there's so many things. So child led, yes. However, the power and commitment of integrity to self, because in order for him to be child led, parents have to be self led
And yes, and self-aware, absolutely.
and
You
self aware.
know where again these messages and the drivers are coming from, and where then you feel you can
Mm-hmm.
release and be child-led. And obviously, as I'm saying all of this, I guess I should add the nuance and the disclaimer where everything is safe. Like if
Yes.
there's a moment where you're like, no,
Yes.
you can't do that because that is incredibly unsafe, of
Yeah.
course, then there are guardrails of parenting that are,
Yeah.
always there. But when it's like about preference of an activity or how to approach something from a schooling perspective, like sometimes my son is like laying on the couch eating a snack, like rolling around because like his vestibular system needs that, and he's like needing to be kind of wiggly while we're reviewing vocabulary words, like, right, it doesn't have to be like sitting in a chair looking a certain way, but a
Not
part of my
moving, not
mind
touching. Yes.
could be like, well, this is the way I learned to do it, and so this is the way like learning is supposed to look, like you're sitting
Yeah.
in a chair.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
said, like, that's one
Yeah.
of those perfect, like, who
Yeah.
decided that? Oh, it
Exactly.
worked. It worked for a certain system and structure of large groups of people being educated in a building.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be the case
It
here.
doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't need to. And it's just really questioning that. And I think that safety around being self-aware and giving self permission to discover, it's like the same thing for potty training happened. It's almost like coming into this world of parenting of I'm a trained NLP master practitioner, and I've been doing the work for like 8 years. And then I became a parent, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much power in having these tools, because it's not about parenting. It's like this parallel approach of like who she is and allowing her to become who she's becoming, and also having the boundaries for myself and meeting my needs and not expecting her to do that.
That's right.
Right? Because like I
That's
feel like that was
huge.
a lot of the unraveling that I did and healing work that I did in my world was like, I'm responsible for meeting my needs. So if she's not ready to go pee on the potty, I got to be okay with that. And the first we did like the oh crap potty
Yes.
training bug.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I've
so
heard of
those
that.
those first 3 days, there was so much tension. And it was like, because why? Because a book told me that it had to be 3 days. And
That's
it's like,
right.
I was like, but for what purpose? And so I get on my mastermind call with my girls, and they were like, okay, let's expand this more. And what we discovered was I was feeling trapped. I was feeling pressured.
Mm-hmm.
I was
That's right.
feeling so much pressure from a lot of different areas in my life. And I was like, what does this have to do with me? Instantly, they were like, well, maybe you just need to stop and do it again. And I came back up. I said to my partner, after nap, the diapers are like no pressure, like after nap, we're done. And after nap, that's when she got it. And she's been potty trained ever since. So I was like, okay, how much of this had to do with me? What did I need to learn from her?
That's right.
Like pulling back. And it's like, she is so energetic. She's the most energetic being, all children are. And utilizing her as my mirror versus but I have the tools. I have practiced for this. It doesn't happen overnight. And it's not easy every single day, right? Because
No,
it's
no,
like,
no.
it's
None of
like,
this is perfect.
no, it is totally navigating it on a daily basis around, yes, there's healthy boundaries. I like how you called it the guardrails, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the healthy boundaries for her to become herself, and also letting go of the conditions. Back in my social work days, we would do group programs, and we would put out these little baskets of crafts of felt and those twine, like all these arts and crafts
Yep.
materials. And it was designed because when we are kinesthetic, if we're kinesthetic learners, we've got to be playing with something in our hands. We've got to hold something.
Yeah. I'm
And
holding. I'm
you're
holding
right.
right now. I always hold while I talk. Mm-hmm.
Right, it's that need to connect, and we know this in group programs in a social service agency, we were like, hey, we need to provide, because we want our girls to retain the information in a way that feels safe and secure. So some girls would be, creating, but they were learning. And if you've never known that before, that could be an absolute mind fuck, because you're like, well, they're not paying attention.
That's right. Yeah. My son is almost always has Legos around. So like he'll be building Legos while I'll be reading like
Right.
a history lesson to him or something. So he's taking in the initial information, and then
Mm-hmm.
he'll sit and look at like the online, part
Yeah.
of the program and answer the questions and whatever. But yeah, it can be so open. And I just wanted to touch back on, I think you used the word responsibility, and,
Mm.
and in that sort of, as we identify as parents, especially early and coming into parenting, right? Of course you have to keep this small little being alive, and there is absolute responsibility
Totally.
to this being.
Yeah.
What I think has gotten so hijacked, and I heard forget if it was a podcast or like a radio interview, it was a few years ago. And it was focused on psychology and the psychology of parenting, particularly in the United States, because there's a different sort of combination of elements here with like a lack of social services and a lack of early childhood care that's free and all of that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and healthcare that we all have to like figure out on our own, all of that.
Right.
In the US, it's very like there's so much sense of responsibility then, and like figuring out financing for something like college, like there's just so much less in terms of like social services that are part of parenting, or like maternity leave and
I was just going to say
leave,
maternity leave,
any kind of parent leave, any of that, right? It's just like so limited. And so what it creates is this hyper independent sense of responsibility on the role of being a parent. So you feel like it's all on you. It's your fault if you mess it up. And in generations past, I have felt this personally, and I think other people have as well, as we're talking about generational aspects, there was this idea of parent being kind of like the end all be all arbiter of a child's life, and that how they behaved or what happened in their life was a direct reflection on you, right? And being like a good parent or a successful parent, etc. And what I've come to really find, and one of the most beautiful models for me as an adult, like prior to becoming a parent, I got this messaging early on in my sober journey, was meeting wonderful other sober folks who had learned that they were not their child's higher power. They were a guide. They were here to share information, to share life experiencing, to share things, yes, about staying safe and staying alive and providing food and things. Like, yes, like you are there to provide a role, but not the role.
Not the only role.
Not the only role, not the end all be all, not the like, you must do all that I say because I am your parent. Kids in this generation do not respond to that.
No. They are kicking and screaming.
Right,
and
like
rightly
for freedom
so.
and independence, and being seen for who they are from the beginning.
Yes.
Not once they're 18 or when they start to shift from like tribe relationship and dynamic to more independent and like, identifying as an individual. No, they're identifying as individuals like out of the womb.
Or the day they were conceived. Yeah, I was like, conception.
Yeah, AJ was very much who he was from minute one.
I say the same thing.
Right. So it's like, I have to remind myself of that in those moments where I'm feeling a sense of wanting to like control or want something to be my way. Oh, wait. I am not his higher power. I am here to provide an example, some information, to be a guide, but I'm not the end all be all. And he has his own, like,
that's what I was going to say.
Relationship to, and for wherever people are on the spectrum of what we could call either spirituality or connection to true self or God or whatever, just, he has his own connection to the universe. And I am not that. I'm a participant in that. I'm like a player in it, but it's not me. And that has been it's like so much relief came.
I was going to say,
saw that said and modeled, and I was like, oh, when I have a child, because luckily I got sober before I did have my child, like, oh, I'm going to remember that. And I hung on to it like from the very beginning. I'm like, oh, right.
But I also feel like there's so much permission in that. And that's what I think has been like my key around just permission, and permission to not know it all, to not have to do it all, and sharing that, and having that support within my community and resourcing myself in a way of like, we're having these very high level conversations about parenting and motherhood and business. And I'm just going to speak for myself. I didn't get here alone. Like I didn't come
Of
to all
course
of these
not.
relevant, I've been investing in myself in many ways for many years. Because I think there was a light inside me that said, like, I just don't want to do it that way. And I knew, there was a time in my life where I was like, nope, I'm not going to be a mom. Like I've got two cats and I'm done. Like I told my mom, these are your grandchildren. These are your fur babes. Like, this is it. And I got my dream job, and I was in a car accident like 3 weeks after that. And that's when I started to really question, like, what's going on? Like, how did this even, like, I am like on a high. How did this happen? And that's when my supervisor and the executive director looked at me and they're like, yeah, have you heard of? And I was like, sorry, what? And I read the book, Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life.
Yes, I have it on my bookshelf.
Right? It's become like my go-to. And I don't ever read books. Now I do, but I don't ever read books and finish them. And that book I read that night, back to front. And I was so angry. Probably because my higher self knew that she was so right. And there was so much truth to it, but I was angry for a little bit. I couldn't comprehend logically what she meant.
Of course, the mind has to catch up in its own time to
I was
the
like,
truth.
you're a liar, like you're lying. Don't tell me that someone brought this up. Like I had lost so many of people I love to like ailments and cancer. And I was like, you're lying. This is a lie. And then within that same breath, there was so much permission and freedom in there, because I was like, wait a minute. You're telling me that I actually have a lot more power than I think.
That's right.
I do. And that was it. I was like, okay. And I went to a weekend program. I was like, I'm going to be the best social worker ever. I'm not going to burn out. I'm going to learn all the tools. And then like day one, they wrote something up on the board and they were like, yeah, there's these presenting problems. So there's like, you have a headache, or you have this, or blah, blah, blah. And then the semi-conscious is like, you don't have boundaries, or you've got financial problems, but there's always a root. And I was like, okay, what's the root? And they wrote it, and it was like, not good enough. And I was like, ooh. And then it was like, unlovable. And that was it. I was done. I was a champagne bottle being shook up, and I was like sitting at the back, like, like sitting beside like fellow counselors, like, no, like, don't let them see me. I'm about to lose it. And I remember running to the bathroom and I'm like, I am done. That changed I never in my life have experienced a moment where I saw every moment before that moment line up and go, this is actually the truth.
Yeah.
And you actually have the power. And I was like, so I've been believing that I'm unlovable for 27 years. Sorry. And so I said to the people at the front of the room, I said, if you're right and what you're saying is true, I could have a completely different life. They're like, yes. I was like, okay, I'm in. And I have never left.
Yep.
I've never left.
I love those moments. I've had very similar realizations, both that you've just described, like really similar. And they're like how it felt viscerally, and some of the similar like thought shifts and how they shifted. And in my experience, I've seen others maybe like reveal again a little bit at times when things have gotten maybe particularly scary or triggered, but rarely. Usually when I've seen people turn that corner from realizing, and it is exactly as you described it, I'm miserable, I'm uncomfortable, something's wrong. There's this like sort of toggling going back and forth between my mind and the truth. And then I'm given the message that I create my existence.
Like, sorry, no.
And then, right. And then the critical self comes in and is like, well, if I create all of this, why the heck have I created a lot of these things? Like, this is awful why am I creating this stuff? What's the root? Right. And then you get to that, like, oh, if from a place of self-love and acceptance and gentleness and space and care, I can see, oh, I've been creating all of that for a purpose. Very likely I've come to find with almost everybody, it's to then be of service to others from those experiences. Because you have then empathy and understanding. And so, it's perfect. Like, it's perfect for something. I maybe don't totally see what it is yet. And it's this beautiful full cycle realization of the power of consciousness. Like, I am a conscious creator of my life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then this goes back to our kids, right? Like we create them both consciously and then the biological piece.
Yeah.
And they come in. I truly believe that our children choose us.
Choose us. Yeah.
And we come into this relationship, and then it's like, oh, to your point about mirroring, right? Oh, my child is providing me this incredible mirroring and reflection for me to look at if and when I am being triggered, like, what is it in me?
What is it in me?
And once we take that from a place of responsibility and not a heavy responsibility but from like an empowered truth,
Yes.
like, oh, okay, I get this dynamic
Right.
now,
Right.
and I'm not a victim
No.
to any of these things happening. Like my
No.
child's not doing something to
To
me.
me. Yeah.
That
I
is
didn't
super
do
important.
something wrong to deserve this. Like that
No.
mentality is like,
Right.
again, so like permission to just be present in what is showing me, and like going from not wanting to have children because I was protecting myself from ever loving anything because I did not love myself, and then did the work and then found my soulmate. I created that man. I remember going, are you sure you were born in 1986? Because I'm pretty sure I just made you in 2012. Like, are you sure? And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure I've had a whole life before I was like, no, I don't know, man. Like, pretty sure my conscious like created you, you know, and that's a story for another time. And then it was like before finding him, like truly loving myself and going, oh, like maybe I could be a mom. You know, I'm like working with young moms at an agency, like so empowered and just so like grateful to be within that organization. And then becoming a mother going, oh my God, like, oh my goodness, like there's so much more to this than I would have ever expected. And I think it's that personal power. Like I didn't know I had a choice until I did. You know, I didn't know.
Yeah,
like
we don't know until we know. And then that's that moment where most people I experience who have this, there's not a going back.
You can't.
Once you're in this different state of awareness, then you play in that state of awareness. It doesn't mean it's always perfect, and it's certainly not a linear process from there. It's a lifelong, beautiful journey.
Yeah.
But it's like flipping on a switch of awareness.
You can't like unknow it, and you can't go back, because every time you do it, it's almost like the universe is like, no, like I told you, there's a better way. There's a better way. Like, let me bring you. And that's interesting, because when I became a mother, I was like, I hit the darkness of the dark, and I was like, whoa, like no, this wasn't going to happen to me. Like I was like, no. And then it was like, yeah, but this is your journey because of what, you know, you've asked for, you know, because of what you desire. And it is that purpose of service that you were talking about. Of like, we have so much more power than I think anyone wants us to know. Right.
The human is so afraid of its own power, right? So we reflect back to each other that we don't have it, generally from the mind and like the body, person, vehicle. But once we do tap into it, and then we can surround ourselves with a group of people who also feel that,
feel the same.
You're getting more back of that reflection of that like true empowerment
and a place of like, it's just this permission to say that like I am allowed to feel sad and I'm allowed to feel joy at the same time. Right. And we've just never learned that. Like we've never learned that. So it's like permission to not know, but permission to give ourselves like the space to experience that. And I have in my own journey gone, I can either choose to beat myself up, which I do. Like, I think that's again, I'm a human. I have a spirit. We co-create together. Some days it's really great. Some days it's like, oh gosh, I'm in it. Right. But it's like having the strategies and having the toolbox to be able to co-create that has been that opportunity. And then you have your children and you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I have a responsibility for them. I have a responsibility to be their guide. And I also have a responsibility to take care of me, because that's what they're calling me forward to do.
And if we don't do that, we are then flipping that like energetic dynamic and the expectations and so much then more onto our children to either like fulfill that sense of self and doing the work and being on that inner journey. And so that's been also beautiful too, for me to see like the permission to continually point back to that for myself gives my son permission to do that for himself.
Yeah.
To say, I need to take a break. Oh no, I really only want to go do this and spend my time resting or playing a video game or whatever. It's like, oh, and you need that. And I know when I need it, right? So there becomes this like mutual trust and respect in people saying what they need and then going and doing that, rather than the sort of convoluted and confusing, more codependent relationship where like how you're feeling then indicates how I'm feeling.
Yes.
And that's a tricky, like that could be a
the
whole nother episode.
I was just gonna say that I could go right into that like right now, and I won't, because I think that like everything that we have shared today, I am just like, I'm almost like in a high right now, because I just think about, you know, I don't think, well, you don't know me before now, but my whole business has been about self-love. That was, everybody was like, Nicole self-love, Nicole self-love. And that has been my journey. And now becoming a parent has been like merging this idea of loving self and being present with self while also making this impact in the world, you know, for the betterment of the world. And so how do we break down what's not working anymore, you know, and doing that from a place of feeling grounded and safe and secure, and also moving forward. So thank you for all of this. I feel like we could talk for the entire day, but I will just ask you this. If you were to go back and tell your younger self as a mom, you know, something that was ever like life, like the most profound thing that you have realized in your journey, what would you want her to know?
Yeah, I think about this from time to time. It's such a beautiful question. Very simply, you are enough. Yeah, I too didn't feel that until my 30s. And that was that root piece, you know, never feeling like enough, really playing that played out through a lot of aspects of perfectionism and being very driven and trying to fill that void with like external accomplishments and things. And I just so fully know now I'm enough. And I would have loved maybe for her to have had a more foundational sense of that. But then, of course, I'm so grateful that I didn't, and that it came when it came, and like for every perfect, you know, moment that has evolved from the pain of not knowing that, you know, that catalyst has been such a powerful force in my life. But yeah, I think I want any young person to know that they're enough.
Absolutely.
Just
me too.
Point blank, however they are, wherever they are, however they're experiencing themselves in their life is enough.
Yeah. You were born enough, and that's it.
That's right.
That's the truth.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful, and I would love to have you back.
I would love to.
Thank you.